Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse. The band is back together. I know I said you wouldn't see us until January, but Martin was like, "Hey, I got a cool idea for a quick show. You want to do it before we meet up in Newburgh for SOT Fall Fest?" And I was like, "Certainly, Martin." So, welcome back, Martin.
Yeah, I thought we should get back in the saddle before this fest. And yeah, we've got various more. I did a whole bunch of things for Contrarians coming up as well. So yeah, I've gone on guested on people's shows. So yeah, it's good to get back, and it's good to have a show just before. I think it's a good omen to have a show just before the event. So yeah, anybody who's anywhere around the New York area, come down and see us on Saturday. We're there all day doing cool panels and stuff at Pete's Fest in Newburgh. So very cool. I don't know, a few more details maybe.
Yeah, so basically, it's from 1 till midnight, I guess, right? So it's at two locations. So the first half of the day, all the panel discussions will be at the Newburgh Brewing Company in Newburgh, New York, right down by the Hudson River. So that'll be from 1 to 5. And we have a separate room for us and everything like that. We'll be recreating some of our shows live. So Martin and I will be doing our thing. It's going to be a little contrarian segment. There's going to be Hudson Valley Squares in the Proxy and the Monsters Den. So that'll be from 1 to 5. And then from 5 to 9, we're going to move over to the warehouse. That's Dan Brown's place. You go there. He's got food. He's got a full bar, right? The meet and greet, eat, drink, happy hour, talk, chat, get to know us, whatever. Everybody can kind of mingle. And then at 9 o'clock, Rick Labonte and his band of brothers coming down from Canada. We got a bunch of people coming down from Canada, and they're going to play three sets of classic rock and hard rock favorites, and probably some original tunes as well. So it'll be a fun time. So come down to Newburgh, New York, here in the Hudson Valley if you are local and want to spend some time. It is a free event. Obviously, for purchase will be food and alcohol and merch and things like that, but it's a free event to attend. So come down, hang out. It'll be lots of fun, and it's going to be cold, but it'll be fun.
Yeah,
It'll be fun.
very
It'll be
cool.
warm inside.
Yeah.
So we got an interesting little topic here today because this is something that Martin has mentioned many times on many shows. This whole concept, like, well, I've never listened to this band. I know I should, but that's going to be a band I'm going to save for my retirement when I have lots of time on my hands to go and investigate a catalog that I just don't have time for now. And so Martin's like, why don't we do that? We each pick five bands that we know we probably should like, or we know we should have investigated, but we just haven't yet. And maybe someday we actually will. So we've each picked out five bands. It's any genre, right? What do you want to do, two at a time, Martin, or you want to go back and forth through the five?
Let's do two at a time.
Okay.
Yeah, to kick off. So yeah, this does kind of overlap. This is a concept near and dear to my heart. It really overlaps with that idea of, I always call them retirement bands, but I feel like I'm starting this now, and I feel like on a deeper level, this is literally the way I want to consume music for however many years I have left, kind of thing. So that's why I like this idea of calling it five bands I vow to get serious about. And it could start now, sort of thing. But the idea is bands where you go, I know this aligns with my personality, or maybe it's even if I get serious about this persona, this guy's catalog and all his lyrics and his music and all that sort of thing. And you're actually going to see in my list, like there's a lot of singular people involved here, right? So it's almost like it might be where I want my personality to be shifted somewhat, or to go a little bit, or change my outlook on the world, or I don't know, fitness, what you want to do. Like just it's almost like these are bands where you go, I'm kind of in alignment here, because there's a lot of bands where I feel like I've fallen away from, where they don't line up with my personality anymore, or I hate using that term outgrown, because that then it sounds like you're being very dismissive in a haughty way about it, or a snobby way about it. But and the other funny thing that happens with a lot of these bands is or this process, because it is a process, because it's very much that idea of it intersects with when people suggest new music to you, or oh, you should check out this band or whatever, right? And my comeback will be my first band. I mean, because this is what I say all the time, right? So my first act is Peter Hamill, right? So the funny thing with Peter Hamill, and I've mentioned Peter Hamill before, but I was a late comer to Vandergraaf Generator, but then I went whole in. I loved Vandergraaf Generator about 15 years ago for a couple or 3 years, learned everything left and right, right? They came to town. Got to meet them all. They signed all my stuff. They were great guys, super nice guys. Saw the show at a small venue, the Opera House in Toronto. But then, and then all along the way, there's been this Peter Hamill catalog. And this is the other cool thing about a lot of the acts that might fall into this. And this might even be a whole separate show. Maybe we've even done one on this, but the family of bands, the family of albums based on side projects and solo albums by the people in this band that you really, really like, really expands your focus. You know, a clear example is Fish and Marillion, right?
Right.
That kind of idea, right? I mean, there's basically two decent Marillions moving along in parallel, and you can just enjoy both of them, right? But so the interesting thing about Peter Hamill is that I always had, you know, where's my little stack? I didn't bring the vinyl in here, but where's my? Well, I guess I only got a few here, but you know, these things just kind of accumulate. I've got a few Peter Hamill on CD here, and I should have brought them in, but I've got another 7 or 8 on vinyl. But the thing is, you look at this guy's catalog, and it's massive, and it's really interesting when you go play the stuff, because with a lot of these bands, these ones in particular, for me, it's like they're there, you respect them, but you just it's like a year goes by and you don't think about them, and you go back and you play it and you go, this is amazing stuff, and you read the lyrics and it's really cool. You know, his solo catalog goes back all along through the Vandergraaf years. And then it gets really cool with Nadir's Big Chance, February 75. People talk about that as like an early punk album. I love Sitting Targets. I was playing it the other day to set up for this episode again, especially the title track and all sorts of cool things. I love his voice, love his lyrics. And the thing is, you know, I'm looking at the catalog here. There's like 25, 30, I don't know, about 30 records here, right? Oh, I got to watch for my cameras. I'll lift my notes up like that. So there's all these, there's tons and tons and tons of stuff there where it's like a whole world of cool things. And if you respect the guy and you love kind of the types of music he likes, and you know he's lyrically there, he's just like a super creative guy. There's so much inspiration you can get from a creative person like that, especially if you want to do creative things. You know, I might want to do more art as time goes on, sort of thing. So that's my first example. And I wanted to pick that because that's the one where people say, oh, you should check out this band or whatever. It's like, I usually wisecrack back and say, man, I got 30 Peter Hamill albums to get to. I don't need a new band of 20-year-olds, you know, who are making perfectly great, amazing doom music, and they're from the right country, Sweden, or whatever, right? Or they're from Britain. You know, that's the other thing that I find with a lot of this stuff. I'm going through piles and piles of junk CDs, and like, you know, what do I take down to Value Village and just drop off or whatever, or put out in the garbage area or whatever. And you know, invariably, I'm such a British snob that it's like, if it's something I totally don't know anything about, but it's on a major label and it's from Britain, I'll keep it. But if it's from Canada, no, I'm not going to keep it, right? Or if it's an indie from Canada, it's like, no. I have thousands of CDs that I'm curious about and want to learn, but I don't have time to get around to them. But to get back to the point, I think I want to get serious more so about these bands that have these massive catalogs, and talk about a guy committed to recording. It's Peter Hamill. He's just got so many albums out, right? And then my second one of the first two is a very similar situation. Hugh Cornwell from the Stranglers, where I've been playing the Stranglers all the time, a lot over the last 20, 30 years. I've really gotten into them. I love the new album, Dark Matters. I've interviewed those guys a bunch of times. They're always super interesting interviews. And then there's this exiled member. I know what, I think there's an episode where we've talked about some of this stuff separately, but so he goes along and he's got about 10 studio albums, right? And he's like the enigmatic, cool lead singer of the classic lineup of the Stranglers. So he's going along. So he's just like a Fish and Marillion situation. But the funny thing is, preparing for this episode again, I thought, okay, I'm going to start wading into this stuff. And sometimes you find with these artists that you think you want to treat as a retirement band, Some of the music's a little casual. He's got some styles that I'm not crazy about. Sometimes the singing seems to be getting a little inaccurate in his old age. He's like up over 70 or whatever. And I brought this out to show as an interesting sort of corollary to this. The other thing that makes you want to go after these bands and say, "Oh, I got to get serious about this catalog," is when you make a serious commitment to buying the physical of something, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You go, "Oh, I'm going to go all in, and it's going to force me to get into this band," right? So I remember getting the UK subs, the albums Volume One, A through M. This is a band that named all their albums with the letters of the alphabet to start with, right? The first one's called A Different Kind of Blues, and then you got Brand New Age, and then I think it was Collision Course or something, or Crash Course, yeah. So you know, I thought, okay, get this. I love the early UK subs, but again, just like Hugh Cornwell and some of these bands, they got a little more casual as time went on, and the recordings got a little cheaper and stuff. So sometimes you can take these retirement bands and you do your 2 or 3 hours of fast food on them, and you realize there's not enough there to keep you interested. I just went through this with Killing Joke recently, right? Where I thought, when am I going to learn Killing Joke properly? I know this is a band I'm supposed to love. Everybody thinks it's one of the coolest bands on the planet. They've been making records since I think 1979 or 81 or something like that. And I had these things as new releases to go on. So I went through the whole catalog and stuff. I'm not super into this kind of music, right? And you got to just sometimes admit, even if the band's totally cool. I've been noticing this a lot lately with people putting down Tool recently, right? There's a lot of people saying, I just can't get into Tool. I try and I try and I try, and it just sounds like just a double helix fractal over and over, things going around and around in circles kind of thing, and I can't get into them. People have said this for years about Radiohead, right? So we keep constantly being told, oh, you got to be a massive Tool fan and expert, and you got to totally get into Radiohead. This is the most enriching music of all time, right? And you try and you try, you go back and you realize you can't. So I think there are certain bands like this Killing Joke example, super fast, kind of got rid of it. The UK subs kind of, and I feel that with a little bit of Hugh Cornwell as well. So there's light at the end of the tunnel where you can actually go through these things and realize, you kind of have exhausted it, or you can exhaust it a little sooner. And it's not a band that you have to, you can put some things aside. And this again also falls into this whole idea that all of us as music fans, we think we have to like everything, right? Yeah. Or respect everything at least, right? But when it's almost like decluttering, right? It's and I'm going through like a lot of that right now with boxes and boxes of unalphabetized CDs that are just junk CDs. And I've over the years like thrown out a few more from the boxes, thrown out a few more, go to the next layer, throw them out. It's like decluttering, right? So you have to declutter, I think, with these bands and just realize you're not going to ever be a Talking Heads fan or whatever, right? Even though, the world tells you that you're not a smart person if you're not into the Talking Heads, right? So yeah, those are my first two. I'm babbling on, but I think I got most of the concepts out, so I think I'll be shorter when I go to my next two. So
yeah, I mean, this is an interesting concept because especially like here on the channel, we've been doing like ranking the album shows for I don't know 6-7 years on Sea Tranquility, right? And I watch and read a lot of the comments, and people like, oh, have you ever ranked this band? You should, whatever. And I'll see these comments, and I'm like, yeah, that's a band I've known for ages, and I've heard some stuff here and there, but you can't buy every single catalog. You can't own everything and hear everything by every band. There's just so many out there. But there's certain bands that I'm like, in going through this and thinking of bands, there's some that I came up with that I was like, I really don't have an explanation for why I never investigated this band, but they would totally fall in line. But then, it's funny because you talk about the Peter Hamill thing. I mean, I've got like most of his 70s albums, but like there's like so much beyond that. It's kind of like when someone says to you, Martin, it's like, hey, Martin, have you ever seen that show on HBO? It's amazing. You would love it. And I'm like, well, what season are they on? Oh, they're already in the third season. I'm kind of like, ugh. That's way too much of a commitment to go back and then rewatch 2 or 3 seasons to go get caught up. Yeah. It's very similar with some of these bands, right? So the first band here I don't know why I never listened to this band. I've known of them for ages because they're from New York. Their old guitar player was kind of like an underground sensation in these parts. Virgin Steel.
Yeah.
I've never owned a Virgin Steel album. I've heard things here and there. I've always liked them. I like 80s US metal. They're kind of, always looked at as kind of like a big influence on the European power metal scene, and like alongside Manowar, one of those bands in back then who were really creating, music that would influence like a whole slew of bands from all over the planet. And I've had people come up to me for years. It's like, Pete, when are you going to talk about Agent Steel? And I'm always kind of like, yeah, about that band. Yeah, I need to get around to that. But we got 40 years worth of albums, 16 studio albums. They're not easy. Some of them are not easy to get. And I've always just kind of like, all right, maybe back in the 80s when I had that Jack Starr solo album cassette, which I really liked, I should have been, you know what? Let me go investigate his main band and start from there. But I never did. And now I'm very interested in doing so. But again, now, when you do it, when you say that now, you're like, oh, 16 albums. I have all this other stuff I got to listen to. It's like, yeah, I'll get to it eventually. But do we
Yeah.
ever get to it? We'd like to. Our
Yeah.
heart's in the right place. But will we ever get to it? I don't know. I would think out of every band on my list or artist on my list, I think Virgin Steel is the one that I really do want to investigate and really dive into because everything I've heard, I've really liked. I just need to take that kind of first step. And I
Just
know,
a quick point on that. I mean, I knew those first three albums like the back of my hand for years and years and years, and now I don't remember a single thing about it. But the main point is that when you see 16 albums, you know that they're serious, and you also, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, sensibly speaking, they probably got better and better and better and better over the years, right? Because there's certain categories of bands where they're just going to do their thing and get more like Virgin Steel over time, sort of thing. But my Killing Joke example, you've got a band where they're most of the time on major labels and they're going through all the trends of the industry, and because they're an electronic band, they're trying all the different production techniques and stuff. So a lot of, you get certain bands, if it's underground enough, they're probably going to just get better at what you might have liked about them in the first place. And then other bands are going to go on a journey, I guess is what I'm saying, right?
yeah, yeah.
So I don't know, apropos of nothing. I don't know what that exactly means, but I think the point was when you see 16 albums, you know they're serious. They love creativity. They're in it for the right reasons. They're probably not making a lot of money, but you will be rewarded if you like the whole snow globe that Virgin Steel created in the early days, and David's voice and all that kind of stuff. If you like it to begin with, it's probably just going to get better.
You would think, right? Now, the argument against that, and I'm going to go out of order here because I think it perfectly plays into what you're talking about here. Um, there's instances where a band's been around for a long time, but maybe like they released a bunch of albums early on, then a bunch of years of inactivity, they broke up, then they get back together. It's a severely different lineup and whatnot. Cloven Hoof is one of my other choices. So again, one of those original new wave of British heavy metal bands that, you know, for whatever reason, they always come up. I've never listened to them. There's so many of these bands from that period that you can get into. And, they released those three albums during that time period. And then they went away. So now they've got six other albums that have been released in more recent years, but with a completely different lineup. I don't even know how many original members are left. I haven't heard any of it. I haven't heard the original albums. I haven't heard any of the stuff recent. I've heard the recent stuff is pretty good. Rich Catino's always telling me, Cloven Hoof, man, they're so good, you got to get into them. I'm like, I know I do. But the argument against what you said is you would think after all these years they would get better, but then people are gonna be like, it's not really the same band anymore.
Yeah.
You know. But another back to kind of solidify that is look at the band like Satan. So they had those very few albums in the 80s and then came back all these years later and now are putting out some of the best albums of their career with pretty much the same lineup. So that basically backs up what you're saying is like they came back all these years later and now they're doing a better version of Satan than they were doing back in the early 80s.
Yeah. And that's what I like about my choices, because it is that guy in his 70s now, kind of thing, which is cool. I like seeing, like, you've been around for 50 years or 40 years making music, and here you are, it's still you in your 70s, kind of thing. I just wanted to, before we moved on, just show quickly my the Hugh Cornwell CDs that just accumulate, right? And again, it's almost like it was in the 70s, where you just look at, just like with all my faceless CDs that I know nothing about, that I want to check out for curiosity point. You see a cool album cover, you read the song titles, you go, oh, this is pretty cool. These guys seem like guys that I would like, right? And that kind of pushes you to check it out, number one, and then give them the benefit of the doubt. But if there's a bunch of signals that you don't like, you look at the song titles and they're really interesting, but I mean, you just look at these album covers and what the guy looks like. He's just a cool looking dude, right? And then, First Bus to Babylon. So I got all these signed a long time ago when he did a little in-store above Sam the Record Man. Yeah, anyways, are you done? Is Cloven Hoof your second choice?
Yeah, well, it was going to be my last, but it just made more sense to slot them in here because it
Okay.
perfectly went in line with what you were talking about. So go for it.
All
Go.
right. Okay, so another choice I have is a little bit different but similar. It's the Finn brothers, Neil Finn and Tim Finn, right? So I've got a few. They just accumulate. I can't tell you anything that's on these records, but I like this record. I would pull this out and put it on and go, why have I not been listening to this all my life? I should listen to this more, because these guys are so cool. They're just really, really cool, right? And this Seven Worlds Collide album is amazing. Tim Finn before and after. So, I looked them up, and it's like Neil has roughly 9 studio solo albums. Tim has 10. There are 8 Crowded House albums. I was never a Crowded House fan. It was okay. It was just pop. It was there, but it was pretty good. But for them to have that many albums, I'm sure they're really, really good albums, right? And so, you add that up, it's almost 30 albums where you could get into this thing and split ends. And, it's a big family of stuff, right? So this falls more into the line of, well, I mean, it's similar to, Peter Hamill and Hugh Cornwell are grizzled UK guys, and they're eccentrics and stuff. But this falls more in the line of, there's just really smart, intelligent pop songwriting out there, thousands and thousands of records that I should be getting into that I haven't been getting into. So the Finn brothers, there's another one. And my next one is kind of a little bit of a mix of all of this, but it leans a little more to, I could have almost came up with this idea where you and I would come up with 5 subgenres of rock and roll that we would get into, right? That for retirement, I really got to explore more of that sort of thing. And one I've always been on about for the last 15 years or so is post-punk. I've always been, I'm super interested in all that kind of 1978 to 1987 sort of period. And
No jazz rock for you, Martin?
No jazz rock, no fusion, no classical, no country. I'm going to go to my grave and not learn any of that stuff, right? Probably not even much more prog, and probably not much more metal is in my list, because, I know most of the metal bands. I mean, this brings up another point. We're bringing up artists where almost like the entire catalog is more or less unknown for us. We could have a whole discussion about 25 album bands where you and I both know the first 12 super well, but we don't know the end 12, right? And so it's like a half and half situation, right? But so Echo and the Bunnymen for me is a little bit like that, where I'm pretty well versed with Porcupine from 83, Ocean Rain 84, Echo and the Bunnymen 87, and the early ones, Crocodile Heaven up here. But again, this is a band where there's a whole back half of about 7 or 8 albums, 9 albums, where I could totally get into. And that brings up, the Ian McCulloch and the side projects and stuff. Yeah. Julian Cope is another one that's a little similar like this as well, where, there's the Teardrop Explodes and all that. So, and just as a case in point, I was just flipping around YouTube the other day, and I found a very helpful, useful, 10 post-punk bands you might not know about. And I went through them, and it was just fascinating stories. I would watch the little thing on it. I would walk over to Spotify. I would listen to what was there, or if it wasn't on Spotify, YouTube, I would read their wiki page if there was one. Some of these bands, he said, they don't even have a wiki page or whatever, but fascinating stories of stuff that like, this legendary album that's been reissued 3 times and all the critics know it, from 1980, that I knew nothing about or very little about, and I play it and I go, damn, this is really cool. And it often falls into that category of post-punk. So post-punk is a super important one for me. The other important one for me is hardcore punk. um, you know be that, maybe California, but probably not. I'm more inclined to East Coast, and then I'm even more inclined to the UK, right? Because I'm a UK snob, right? But I can see, I even when I started going through my junk CDs again, I even started trying to pick out the ones that might be punk, right? And this is later days punk, where it's what I don't know about, and I started building a little section, right? Like I have a little hip hop section, I have a little country section, right? So I'm going to build this little punk section of these things, and remember not to forget about these bands, right?
Yeah.
Remember not to forget. So yeah. So Echo and the Bunnymen was my second choice. And so for my last one, yeah, I'll just quickly mention, like I say, Julian Cope maybe falls into this category. The Fall, Sonic Youth, Primordial. Every time I play Primordial, I'm totally into them, and totally want to get in their whole life philosophy. And even Enslaved totally fits this as well. So does Melvin's, right? I keep thinking these are all my kind of guys, and I should just surrender to these catalogs and learn them great. And they will probably shift my personality up and down, left and right, in some direction. So my last one kind of fits that. Where's my little collection here? And I mentioned these guys. Dinosaur Jr. still fits that as well, because I knew them like the back of my hand for the first 3 or 4 or 5 albums, and then they had much more. Back to the post punk. I've been playing tons of Gang of Four lately, but I've always known them pretty well. So my last one, I think it's my last one. Let's call it my last one, because I've been rambling on forever. Napalm Death. Every single time
Yeah.
I go play this band, I go, why have I been wasting my life not playing this band all the time? And that's what happens every time I put these albums on, right? And it's the kind of situation where I like Poppy later, Napalm Death, from 95, that whole Diatribes area forward, where it's less extreme than the early stuff. But again, when you're into these bands and you get into them in a huge way, you might start with the more accessible version of that band, and then get into everything that they're like now, and you're totally into Barney's philosophy and just who he is as an older person. But again, when you get into these bands and they become your band, and you just know every single note that's coming, and you've read the lyrics up and down, you will go back to the early super extreme crazy stuff, and all of a sudden that's going to sound, you've primed yourself for even that sounding accessible to you now, because they're your band, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I said no metal, but there is actually probably a ton of metal, where another one like this where I just feel like I've tried and tried and tried, and I just can't get into it, is Mastodon, Tool, and Radiohead. We could list all the super critically acclaimed bands that we try to get into, and I just can't. I just don't gravitate to playing them all the time. Whereas something like Napalm Death, I don't know what it is, but I just play those albums, go, this is a freaking masterpiece. I love this. I love everything about this band. And why am I not playing them, for a few hours every single week, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there you go. Those are all my choices and my full rant.
All right. Yeah, I mean, Napalm Death is another band for me. Everything I've heard, I've liked, but I've just never like taken that step. Just never done. And Mastodon, I've been listening to since they first came out. I really enjoy them a lot. You mentioned Enslaved and Primordial. That's a great band. Primordial's
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's big catalog, and there's a lot. Enslaved, a lot of albums, and they're dense albums, right? So it's you're not in for easy listens. That's the thing too. So,
Yeah.
all right. My next two are related, and I love German metal. I listen to tons of German metal bands across all, whether it's thrash or power metal and whatnot. But for whatever reason, Martin, I never investigated Rage or Running Wild. Go figure. These are bands that most people are into, who are into metal, certainly into power metal. And usually it's like, well, if you're into like Halloween and Gravedigger, Rage and Running Wild is part of the equation, right? It's part of the big package, the big four. Yeah, never went there. I mean, both bands have been around for like 40 years. Running Wild's got 17 records. Rage has over 20, right? So right then and there, it's an enormous catalog. And it's just, to me, it just seems very intimidating. Because again, I'm kind of selective when it comes to power metal. But I do like so many German bands. I'm thinking I probably will love these guys. But every time I think about it, I'm kind of like, yeah, I need to wait until I know it's a time where I have way more time on my hands than I do now to dive into either one of these. I'm sure I like them, and I've heard
You
stuff
know,
here and
Pete,
there.
I'll just mention something here because of what you do with the channel, right? When you think about Rage, you probably think, I will never be smart enough because I didn't follow these at the time to absolutely, to adequately and confidently talk about the difference between a bunch of Rage albums from the
Right.
2000s, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem too, or Destruction or whatever. I won't know the personalities. I think with a lot of these things, you in the back of your mind, you think that extra value you're supposed to get from these things, where I want to go talk about them now. I definitely feel with a lot of bands that if you haven't been following it all along, I'm never going to have the confidence to talk about them confidently, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to that whole thing, you had to be there, right? So it's like when you were into them back in the 80s, it's a different story. When you're trying to
Yeah.
go in blind 30, 40 years later, there's not that relationship with the music back when you were younger, right? So it's different. Yeah, I totally agree with it. Trying to take them all in all at once rather than following them all along and getting to know each album as they're released over the years. It's a the big difference there. And I just think about it, they're not on my list, but a band that I really tried very hard to get into probably about 20 years ago was Magma, right? And it's a big joke on the channel about how much Pete hates
Yeah.
Magma. I literally
Yeah.
said, all right, I'm gonna, everybody talks about how great these guys are. I'm gonna go out, and I went out and bought like all their albums up to a certain point, whatever. And I'm like listening to it, and I'm like, yeah, I just don't like this at all. I don't like the singing. I don't like the chanting. I don't like the repetitive nature of it. Yeah, Christian's a great drummer, sure, but the rest of it just drove me absolutely nuts. And I kept trying and trying and trying. And then after like 3, 4 years, I was like, this is not doing it for me. I got rid of all of them. I'm like, I'm never going to want to listen to this stuff again. People are like, oh, but maybe Pete, now that you're older, maybe you can appreciate it more. And I went and listened to like one of their more recent albums. I'm like, no, it's still the same crap that I just don't like. Just can't get
Yeah.
into it. So that
Yeah.
wasn't one of my choices, but I wanted to throw that out there. My final choice for today is Bob Seger. So maybe I made the mistake, Martin, years and years and years ago, that I went and bought his two classic live albums from the 70s, both of which are very, well thought of by most people and, usually come up in conversations about those great 70s live albums. But I always kind of felt it's like, well, I bought those first. Those are probably the best representations of all those early 70s songs. Do I really need anything else by him? And I've heard, I think I maybe have one of his later albums, and I've heard a couple here and there, and they're okay, but I've always thought he's a guy who probably, and again, we're looking at 50 years worth of music, so he's got over about 20 albums. And I'm like, am I ever going to like any of this stuff as much as I like those two live albums? Because I really do enjoy those. They're really good. Um, but like none of the stuff I've heard of the latter period has excited me all that much, but people talk so highly about it. And I'm like, I do like the guy because I like Springsteen and I like Tom Petty, right? It's kind of all in that similar type of ballpark. And I'm thinking maybe at some point when I'm a little bit older and I have like a little bit more time on my hands, because I think the older you get, you mellow out a little bit. And I think this kind of like American rock star singer-songwriter thing, it has its place in my life a little bit. And I'm thinking at some point I may want to do that. I haven't as of yet, and I've thought about it numerous times over the years. This was the first guy I thought of when we were thinking about this, as far as like from like a solo guy perspective type of thing. And because I probably would like a lot of these albums, but again, it just seems like such a commitment. And I'm like, or would I do that and then just continue to go back to the live albums and kind of forget about these studio albums? That's the thing. I don't know. So we'll
Yeah.
see. But I think that always is a chance you take when you go and you get live albums first, especially classic live albums, because all of a sudden the studio counterparts kind of seem a little bit inconsequential. But again, that's the live albums are only containing songs from that time period, from the 70s, and there's all this wealth of material from the 80s and on, which I really don't know all that much about other than hits and the bits from albums here and there. So I don't know. We'll see. I think Seeger probably heads the class as far as like a artist that I will investigate at some point when I'm a little bit older, a little more deeply than I have up till now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the general theme of this idea or show is instead of having a predilection to go hear the latest hip new album that everybody's raving about by a band that has 3 or 5 albums out, it's almost like for your new music for the rest of your years, maybe you lean towards somebody who has a massive catalog,
Right.
right? Who's been doing this forever, and you can you have that extra synergy of the different debates you can have by debating their 60s stuff from their 70s stuff from their 80s from their 90s from their
Yeah, there's lots of
how
history
they've
there.
grown as a
Yeah.
person.
Right.
They're older than you already. They've been they've always been older than you, I suppose. Maybe that has something to do with it as well, or at least there's somebody who is at least roughly your age. Maybe that has something to do with it. But yeah, I just and I guess the other subtle adjunct to that is I feel like all these bands that I want to check into have proven that they love creativity, that they're in it for the right reasons. They love making music, they love words, they love being a poet, they love provocative, interesting ideas. They're just interesting people, right? So, and then at the same time, like I say, because they're interesting people who are creatives, and if you think in your later years you want to be more of a creative in some way, they can be an inspiration to you as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in saying all that, folks, no, I'm not going to go out and investigate the Bob Dylan catalog anytime soon. That's probably not going to happen.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
From a
Yeah. This.
creativity standpoint, most people are like, but Pete, it's probably a guy you would probably like. Yeah, no, I've tried. It's doesn't
Yeah.
his voice doesn't work for me. Sorry.
Yeah.
So anyway, Martin, what's going on with books and contrarians and the podcasts?
Well, contrarians, we've got more of the reliving old reviews as a useless tool of confusion coming up, and books wise, there's a bunch of stuff for 2025, but the latest things have just been those 2 Genesis panel books and the Judas Priest panel book. Those have been the latest, but we've got AC/DC at 50. I still got the Who and the right now is the signing stuff for Christmas presents going on. There's a lot of that happening. But that's about it. And then the audio podcast, of course, haven't missed a week there. I just knocked off the first one or the next one this morning, which is all about vocal intros. And that is episode 285 of History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, audio podcast.
Wow. Cool. I just finished the Judas Priest book last night, so we should have a review up on here on the channel fairly soon. I hope to get it done before the big weekend, but
Cool.
maybe tomorrow morning we'll see, or sometime later today if I can squeeze it in. So
Nice.
it's a good read, as always. So, all right, there you go, everybody. So thanks for watching. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, all together all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as a post. And please do hit the like button before we leave. Hopefully, we'll see some of you at the Warehouse in Newburgh Brewery on Saturday for Sea Tranquility Fall Fest 2024. And till then, for Martin Popoff, I'm Pete Pardo. See you all soon. Take care. Have a good weekend, everybody.